The most disturbing dark web horror stories ever told. Story number 1, by Emily Carter. In 2019, I was working as a cybersecurity consultant, specializing in tracking illegal activity on the dark web. My job often took me into places most people couldn't even imagine existed. I thought I'd grown desensitized to it. Drug markets, illegal weapons sales, hacking services. But nothing could have prepared me for the day I stumbled upon a site called the Silent Marketplace. It was a routine assignment at first. A corporate client hired me to investigate a potential data breach. While digging through layers of encrypted forums, I found a post that seemed unrelated to my task. It mentioned a marketplace hidden deep in the dark web, known for selling everything you could ever want. Curious, I decided to investigate further. The site itself was deceptively professional. It had a clean, minimalist design, like a high-end e-commerce platform. But instead of products or services, it was selling people. The homepage displayed categories like new arrivals, special orders, and custom requests. Clicking on one of the categories revealed individual listings, each with a photo of a person, mostly women and children, their faces obscured. Alongside the images were detailed descriptions: age, nationality, physical traits, and horrifyingly, their training level. One listing caught my eye, a girl who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. The description called her docile and ready for immediate delivery. The bidding history showed that the price had already climbed to $25,000. Below the listing were comments from users discussing logistics. How soon can she be delivered to the US? And are there any health guarantees? It was clear this was no hoax. This was real. As I scrolled through more listings, the horror deepened. There were categories for children under 5, for high-profile exclusives, and even for group auctions where multiple people were sold together. The language was clinical, as if these were just commodities. What made it worse was the tone of the community. In the forums attached to the site, users exchanged tips on handling their purchases. One post discussed how to use sedatives to keep victims compliant. Another suggested ways to falsify documents for transport. I spent hours documenting everything: screenshots, URLs, even chat logs. The more evidence I gathered, the more dangerous I realized this was. Every time I logged in, I received private messages from other users. At first, they seemed harmless. Need help navigating? Or looking for something specific? But as time went on, the messages became more targeted. One said, "You've been here a while. Are you buying or just looking?" Another asked, "Who are you really?" The final straw came when I received an email on my personal account. The subject line was blank, but the body contained a single sentence: "We know what you're doing." Attached was a photo of me leaving my office the previous day. My blood ran cold. I hadn't used any personal information to access the site, and I'd taken every precaution to remain anonymous. Yet somehow, they had found me. I immediately wiped my computer and contacted a trusted law enforcement connection. I handed over everything I had, every screenshot, every piece of evidence. The agents were shocked by what I showed them, but they couldn't share much about their investigation. I was told to stay quiet and avoid drawing attention to myself. A few months later, I saw a news report about a dark web sting operation. Authorities had taken down a trafficking ring that sounded eerily similar to the Silent Marketplace. Dozens of victims were rescued, and several high-profile arrests were made. I'd like to think my evidence helped, but it's hard to feel victorious, knowing how many other sites like it probably still exist. Even now, years later, I can't shake the paranoia. I've changed my name, moved to a new city, and avoid using the internet for anything but the basics. But every time I see an unfamiliar car parked near my home or get a strange email, I'm reminded of that message: we know what you're doing. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: curiosity can lead you into places you were never meant to go. The dark web isn't just a digital frontier, it's a predator's playground. And if you venture too far into its shadows, you might not come back the same. Story number 2, by Laura Simmons. In 2016, I was in my second year of medical school in Denver, Colorado, deeply immersed in the world of medical ethics and its often dark history. For one of my research projects, I decided to explore unethical human experiments conducted in the past. I expected to uncover horrifying truths about historical events like the Tuskegee syphilis study or Nazi medical experiments. But what I found was something far worse, evidence that these horrors hadn't ended. They had just gone underground. Late one night, while browsing forums related to my research, I came across references to a site on the dark web called The Human Experiment. According to rumors, it documented ongoing real-life experiments conducted on unwilling participants. I didn't believe it at first. It sounded like an urban legend, the kind of thing created to scare people away from the dark web. But curiosity got the better of me. I accessed the site, telling myself it was for academic purposes, that I needed to verify if such a thing really existed. The site was stark and unnervingly professional. Its homepage was divided into sections labeled sleep deprivation, extreme temperatures, psychological conditioning, and organ removal. Each section detailed experiments being conducted on subjects who, according to the descriptions, were either prisoners, abductees, or volunteers coerced under threat. I clicked on extreme temperatures first. It opened to a page describing experiments where individuals were subjected to freezing conditions to observe how long they could survive. The description was accompanied by a timer counting down to a new experiment, as well as past study results. One result noted the exact number of minutes a person had remained conscious while submerged in ice water. Below it were chilling details about physical reactions: frostbite, organ failure, death. My stomach churned as I read. Then I made the mistake of clicking on the video archive. The first video showed a man strapped to a chair inside what looked like a walk-in freezer. His skin had turned an alarming shade of blue, and his lips quivered as he mumbled incoherently. A gloved hand entered the frame, checking his pulse and taking notes before adjusting the room's temperature even lower. I could hear his breath grow weaker before the video cut out. I couldn't bring myself to watch another video, but I kept scrolling. One section allowed users to leave comments, rating the effectiveness of each experiment. The casual, detached language in these posts was horrifying. People discussed the results as if they were reviewing a product, debating the best ways to prolong suffering while collecting data. The most disturbing part of the site, however, was a page titled "Participants Needed." It was essentially a recruitment form asking for volunteers to take part in groundbreaking medical studies. It required detailed personal information, age, health history, and even family background. But what terrified me most was the section for involuntary participants. It claimed to have networks in place to acquire individuals who fit specific criteria. My hands shook as I realized I was looking at an active human trafficking operation disguised as scientific research. I closed the site immediately, but the nightmare didn't end there. The next morning, I received an email from an untraceable address. The subject line read, "You've seen too much." Attached was a single file, a photo of me sitting at my desk the night before, taken through my laptop's webcam. My heart raced as I realized someone had been watching me the entire time I was on the site. Panicked, I wiped my computer and went straight to the authorities. I handed over everything I had, the screenshots, URLs, even my own account of what I'd seen. The agent I spoke to seemed alarmed, but wouldn't give me any details about what might happen next. "Don't go back there," he warned, "and don't tell anyone else about this." Weeks later, I read a news article about an international sting operation that shut down a dark web network involved in human trafficking and illegal experiments. Though the report didn't confirm it, I couldn't help but wonder if the human experiment was part of the takedown. Even now, years later, I can't shake the memory of those videos, those detailed descriptions of human suffering. I no longer feel safe using my laptop without covering the webcam, and I've stopped exploring the darker parts of the internet entirely. Some doors are meant to stay closed. If you're curious about what lies on the dark web, don't be. The things you find there aren't just disturbing. They'll follow you long after you leave, and some of them might not let you leave at all. Story number 3, by Brian Hartman. In 2017, I was working as an investigative journalist in Chicago, digging into stories that most people wouldn't touch. I'd heard rumors of a dark web community called the Cannibal Cafe, a forum where people allegedly discussed cannibalism. It sounded like an urban legend or a sick joke, but my curiosity got the better of me. I thought it might make for a fascinating expose, a chance to debunk myths about the internet's underworld. What I found was far darker than I ever anticipated. After navigating through encrypted forums, I finally found a link to the Cannibal Cafe. The site's design was rudimentary, with a black background and bold red text, but it was shockingly organized. There were forums, personal ads, and even a section labeled recipes. At first, I thought it was satire, a twisted corner of the internet meant to shock or troll outsiders. But the posts were unnervingly serious. One thread in particular caught my attention. Willing participant looking for a cook. The original post was from someone offering themselves to be eaten. They described their age, weight, and even their diet, as if they were listing nutritional information. Replies flooded the thread, with users asking questions like, "How lean are you?" and "Do you have any health conditions we should know about?" It was horrifyingly clinical, as though they were discussing the preparation of a gourmet meal. I scrolled further, feeling my stomach tighten with each post. There was another thread from someone advertising themselves as a chef. They claimed to have experience in preparing human flesh and offered to help first-timers with their journey. The replies were filled with eager messages from users asking for tips, recipes, and even step-by-step guides. The most disturbing section, though, was recipes. It was exactly what it sounded like, a collection of detailed instructions on how to prepare and cook human flesh. One post described marinating techniques for specific cuts of meat, while another outlined how to butcher a body with minimal waste. I couldn't read more than a few lines before I had to stop. As I continued exploring, I started receiving private messages. At first, they seemed innocuous. "Welcome to the community," or "What brings you here?" But then, they became more pointed. One message read, "Are you here to cook or to be cooked?" Another said, "We don't like tourists. Participate or leave." My blood ran cold. I hadn't posted anything or interacted with anyone. How did they know I was there? The tipping point came when I received an email later that night. The subject line read, "We see you." The message contained a single image, my face, captured through my laptop's webcam while I was on the site. My heart raced as I realized someone had been watching me the entire time. I slammed my laptop shut and disconnected it from the internet, but the feeling of being exposed, of being hunted, didn't go away. I reported everything to my editor the next day. I thought he'd be excited about the story, but instead, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Drop it. You don't mess with people like that." For weeks, I lived in fear, jumping at every sound and avoiding going out at night. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. A few months later, I heard about a man who had been arrested in connection with a cannibalism case. His computer was found to contain links to forums that sounded eerily similar to the Cannibal Cafe. The arrest made headlines, but the site itself vanished without a trace, leaving behind no evidence that it had ever existed. I haven't written about the dark web since. The memory of those posts, those messages, and that photo of me still haunts me. I don't know if the people on that site were serious or just playing some twisted game, but I do know this: some things are better left unseen. If you're thinking about exploring the dark web, don't. It's not just a collection of hidden sites. It's a place where humanity's darkest desires come to life. And once you step into that world, you might find it's impossible to leave unscathed. Story number 4, by Alex Monroe. In 2018, I was a 26-year-old tech enthusiast living in Seattle, Washington. My friends and I had always been fascinated by the darker corners of the internet, frequently discussing urban legends about the dark web. We'd heard stories of drug markets, stolen identities, and even sites offering hitman services. It all seemed like exaggerated horror tales, until the night we decided to explore it for ourselves. It started as a dare during one of our late-night hangouts. My roommate found a post on a tech forum mentioning a dark website called Besa Mafia, a marketplace allegedly offering professional assassins for hire. At first, we laughed it off. The idea of hiring a hitman online sounded ridiculous, like something out of a bad movie. But the more we talked about it, the more curious we became. Could it really exist? We had to find out. Setting up the Tor browser was surprisingly simple, and it wasn't long before we found the site. The homepage was chillingly straightforward. A bold headline read, "Need someone gone? We can help." Below it were categories: personal enemies, business rivals, and even witness protection targets. Each section had detailed descriptions of the services offered, along with price ranges. An accident was $5,000, while a high-profile target could cost upwards of $50,000. My friends and I were stunned. It felt surreal, like we had stumbled into the plot of a crime thriller. We scrolled through the site, reading customer testimonials that sounded disturbingly genuine. Quick, efficient, and no evidence left behind. Highly recommend. Another review read, "Took care of my problem exactly as promised. Worth every penny." The site also featured a FAQ section, answering questions like, "How do you guarantee anonymity?" and "What happens if the hit is unsuccessful?" The language was professional, almost corporate, which made it even more unsettling. It was clear that whoever ran the site wanted to appear legitimate. As we explored further, we found a page labeled Pending Contracts. This was the part that truly terrified me. It was a list of targets, real people, with their names, photos, and detailed descriptions of their routines. One entry read, "Target, John Doe, works as a bank manager, leaves work at 5:30 p.m, drives a blue Honda Accord." Another listed a woman, complete with her address, and a note about her walking her dog every morning at 7 a.m. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. These weren't abstract ideas or faceless entities. These were real lives, meticulously documented and offered up for destruction. It made my skin crawl. Then, out of nowhere, a chat box popped up on the screen. A message appeared. "Need help? Let us know what you're looking for." My friend, thinking it was just an automated message, typed back, "Just browsing." Almost immediately, another message came through. "There's no such thing as just browsing. Are you serious, or are you wasting our time?" That was enough for me. I told everyone to shut it down, and we closed the browser. But the unease lingered. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those names and photos, the smiling faces of people who had no idea they were being targeted. A few days later, I got an email from an untraceable address. The subject line was blank, and the body contained only one sentence: "We know who you are." My stomach dropped. Attached to the email was a photo of my house, taken from the street. I hadn't shared any personal information while on the site, and I had taken every precaution to remain anonymous. But somehow, they had found me. Panic set in. I immediately wiped my computer and disconnected from the internet. I called the police, but they brushed it off, saying there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. "Stay off those sites," the officer advised. "You're lucky it's probably just a scare tactic." For weeks, I lived in constant fear. I changed my daily routines, avoided walking alone, and even moved to a different apartment. Every time I saw a strange car parked near my home, or noticed someone lingering on the street, my paranoia flared. I felt like a target, like someone was watching me, waiting for the right moment. Months later, I read about a sting operation that dismantled Besa Mafia. Authorities discovered that most of the hits had been scams, with criminals taking payments without ever following through. But in some cases, real contracts had been carried out. That knowledge didn't bring me much comfort. Whether the site was real or fake, the fear it instilled was all too real. I've never gone near the dark web again. The memory of those names, those photos, and that chilling email still haunts me. If you're curious about what's out there, don't be. The dark web isn't just a place for myths and legends, it's a playground for real monsters. And once you step into their world, you might not be able to escape. Story number 5. By Samantha T. In 2019, I was a 28-year-old graphic designer living in New York City. I'd always been fascinated by mysteries and unsolved cases, often spending hours on forums and watching documentaries. My curiosity about the dark web started as an extension of that interest. I'd heard all the urban legends, red rooms, black markets, hitman services, but part of me didn't believe they were real. I thought it was all just exaggerated horror stories. One night, while exploring forums about cryptic websites, I stumbled upon a thread discussing something called The Game. Users claimed it was a live streaming site on the dark web where people could watch kidnappings in real time. They even said viewers could vote on what happened to the victims. It sounded too grotesque to be real, but the more I read, the more convinced I became that people believed it existed. Against my better judgment, I decided to look for it. Setting up the Tor browser was easy, and after navigating through several encrypted links, I found myself on a site with a plain black background and the words "The Game" in bold white letters. There was no description, no flashy graphics, just a countdown timer at the top of the page and a message below that read, "The next hunt begins in 1736. I sat there, frozen, staring at the timer as it ticked down. My rational mind told me to leave, to close the browser and forget about it. But I couldn't. Something about the simplicity of the site, the lack of explanation, made it even more unsettling. It felt real. When the timer hit 0, the screen went black for a moment, and then a video feed appeared. The camera was shaky, as if it were mounted on someone's chest or held by hand. It showed a dimly lit alley, the kind you'd find behind a row of apartment buildings. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly, and the camera turned to focus on a figure walking a few yards ahead. A woman, alone, clutching her phone. The chat box beside the video exploded with activity. Messages flooded in so fast I could barely read them. "There she is. Get her now! Don't waste time. Make it messy." My heart pounded as I realized what I was watching. The person holding the camera started moving closer to the woman. She didn't notice at first, too focused on her phone. The camera closed the distance in seconds, and then, in one swift motion, the person grabbed her from behind. She screamed, dropping her phone, but her cries were muffled as a hand clamped over her mouth. The video cut abruptly to a new scene, a dark, windowless room illuminated by a single, flickering light bulb. The woman from the alley was tied to a chair in the center of the room, her face pale and streaked with tears. The chat was still active, and now there was a poll at the bottom of the screen. What happens next? The options made my stomach churn. 1. Release her. 2. Punish her. 3. End it. The votes were piling in rapidly, and the second option, punish her, was leading. The camera panned around the room, showing a figure in a mask standing by the door. The chat erupted again. "Do it now! Let's see some blood." I slammed my laptop shut, unable to watch anymore. My heart was racing, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely think. I told myself it had to be fake, some sick performance for attention. But the fear in that woman's eyes had looked so real, and the details, the shaky camera, the frantic chat, felt too raw to be staged. The nightmare didn't end there. The next day, I received an email from an untraceable address. The subject line was blank, but the body contained a single message: "You watched." Attached was a screenshot of me, taken through my laptop's webcam, staring at the screen during the video. My blood ran cold. I hadn't even considered the possibility that someone might be watching me while I was watching them. I immediately wiped my computer and went to the police. I told them everything, showed them the screenshot, and gave them every detail I could remember about the site. The officer I spoke to seemed sympathetic, but skeptical. "It's probably just a scare tactic," he said. "A lot of these sites are fake." But was it fake? I couldn't get that woman's face out of my mind, her muffled screams echoing in my ears every time I closed my eyes. For weeks, I barely slept. I started changing my daily routine, avoiding walking home alone, and constantly looking over my shoulder. The fear that someone might be watching me didn't go away. Months later, I read an article about a dark website that had been taken down in an international sting operation. The description of the site matched the game almost exactly. Authorities rescued several victims and arrested the people running it. I wanted to feel relief, to believe that what I'd seen had been part of the operation. But I couldn't shake the thought that there were other sites out there, still active, still hunting. To this day, I can't walk alone at night without feeling a twinge of fear. The dark web isn't just a place for myths and urban legends. It's a playground for real monsters. And once you look into its depths, you might find that the monsters start looking back. If you're curious about exploring it, don't. Some things aren't meant to be seen. Story number 6, by Anonymous. In 2017, I was working as a cybersecurity consultant for a private firm, specializing in tracking illegal activity online. It wasn't glamorous work. It meant spending long hours combing through encrypted networks, uncovering fraud, or identifying data breaches. But I believed in what I was doing. My work helped bring some accountability to the shadows of the internet. Then, one day, I stumbled onto a site that changed everything I thought I knew about the dark web. It started with a routine investigation. A client had hired me to track stolen personal data that was being sold on black market forums. It wasn't unusual. People's information gets stolen and resold all the time. But as I sifted through links and threads, I noticed something different. In one forum, users weren't just discussing credit card numbers or fake IDs. They were referencing something they called the family market. I was curious but cautious. The way the users spoke about it was cryptic and guarded, as if they were protecting something much larger than a simple scam. Finally, after hours of digging, I found a link. It led me to a site hidden behind multiple layers of encryption. The homepage greeted me with the words, "For the most discerning clients, your needs, our priority." At first glance, the site looked eerily professional. It was clean, modern, and well organized, like an upscale shopping website. But as I navigated through the pages, I realized what they were selling wasn't products or services, it was people. More specifically, children. Each listing featured a photo of a child, their face partially obscured, but their fear unmistakable. Beneath the photos were detailed descriptions: name, likely fake, age, nationality, and horrifying comments like obedient or trained for compliance. Some listings were labeled new arrivals, while others were under custom orders, offering buyers the option to specify age, gender, and even personality traits. One listing made my stomach churn. It featured a girl who couldn't have been older than 6. The description read, "Fresh stock, untouched, ready for immediate delivery." The bidding for her had already reached $40,000. Below the listing, there were comments from potential buyers asking questions like, "Can she be shipped internationally?" and "Are there health guarantees?" I sat frozen, staring at my screen in disbelief. This wasn't just some sick joke or internet prank. The level of detail, the bidding history, the casual professionalism, it all felt horrifyingly real. I began documenting everything, screenshots, URLs, usernames. As I went deeper into the site, I discovered a section labeled Training Programs. It contained videos that were supposedly proof of the children's compliance. I hesitated before clicking, terrified of what I might see. But I knew I had to gather as much evidence as possible. The first video was grainy, but unmistakably real. A young boy sat in a dark room, his hands tied behind his back. A man's voice barked commands at him, ordering him to stand, sit, and kneel repeatedly. The boy obeyed, his face expressionless, his movements robotic. Another video showed a girl, blindfolded and trembling, being forced to repeat phrases like, "I will obey," over and over again. The videos were short, just a few minutes each, but they were enough to make me sick to my core. The site also had a live chat feature where users could communicate with the administrators. I didn't dare interact, but I scrolled through the conversations. Most of them were about logistics, shipping times, payment methods, and even return policies. One user bragged about a recent purchase, saying, "She arrived exactly as described, perfect condition." As I continued gathering evidence, I noticed something strange. Every time I logged in, I received private messages. At first, they were generic. "Need help finding something?" or "Looking for something specific?" But as time went on, the messages became more direct. One said, "You've been here a while. Are you buying or just looking?" Another read, "We don't like lurkers." The breaking point came when I received an email on my personal account. The subject line was blank, but the body contained a single message. "We know who you are." Attached was a photo of my apartment building, taken from the street. My blood ran cold. I had taken every precaution to remain anonymous, using a secure VPN, logging in from a virtual machine, and masking my IP address. But somehow, they had found me. I immediately wiped my computer and contacted my agency, handing over all the evidence I had collected. The agents I worked with were horrified, but warned me to keep quiet. "These people are highly organized and incredibly dangerous," one of them said. "Don't talk about this with anyone. Don't go looking for more." For weeks, I lived in constant fear. Every time I saw a strange car parked near my apartment or an unfamiliar face on my street, I panicked. I changed my routines, moved to a different part of the city, and avoided the internet as much as possible. But the fear didn't go away. Every shadow, every noise, felt like a threat. Months later, I saw a news report about a major dark web bust. An international task force had taken down a trafficking network responsible for dozens of abductions across multiple countries. The details matched what I had seen on the family market. Dozens of children were rescued, and several high-ranking members of the network were arrested. But for every site shut down, I knew there were others still operating in the shadows. Even now, years later, the memory of that site haunts me. The faces of those children, the emotionless obedience in their eyes, are burned into my mind. I no longer work in cybersecurity. I couldn't take the psychological toll. But the paranoia hasn't left. I still glance over my shoulder, still feel the weight of being watched. The dark web isn't just a digital curiosity, it's a breeding ground for the worst of humanity. If you're thinking about exploring it, don't. Some things aren't just dangerous to see, they're dangerous to know, and once you've seen them, you can never unsee them. Story number 7, by Jamie Phillips. In 2015, I ran a small YouTube channel called Obscure Horror Corner. It was a passion project where I reviewed creepy games, weird internet mysteries, and anything unsettling I could find. I had a loyal but small audience, and I prided myself on exploring things that were off the beaten path. One day, a fan sent me a tip about a game they claimed was hidden on the dark web, a game called Sad Satan. The message was cryptic, almost like a dare. They said the game was deeply disturbing, unlike anything I'd ever seen, and that it had been circulating on obscure forums. Intrigued, I decided to investigate. After some digging and a few dead ends, I found a link to download the game. The file was small, only a few megabytes, and it didn't come with any instructions. Against my better judgment, I installed it, telling myself it was just another strange game for my channel. I had no idea what I was getting into. When I launched Sad Satan, the screen went black for a few seconds before a menu appeared. It was bare bones, just the game's title in white, pixelated text, and a single option: Start. The moment I clicked, I was transported into a first-person view of a dimly lit hallway. The walls were dark and textured like old stone, and the floor was a patchwork of cracked tiles. There was no music, just a low, droning hum that made my chest tighten. As I began to move forward, I noticed the game's mechanics were sluggish. The character walked at an unnervingly slow pace, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. The hallway seemed endless, stretching on with no end in sight. Occasionally, the screen would glitch, distorting the visuals and making me wonder if my computer was malfunctioning. Then the sound started. At first, it was faint, whispers in the background, just barely audible over the hum. As I walked further, the whispers grew louder, overlapping into an incomprehensible cacophony. They weren't in English, but I could hear fragments of words, like names or phrases being spoken angrily or mournfully. I turned up the volume, trying to make sense of it, and that's when I heard it clearly. Children's voices. The whispers morphed into soft cries, then into screams. My hands began to sweat as I gripped my mouse. The game offered no explanation, no context, just an overwhelming sense of dread. I kept walking, unable to turn back, and then the visuals began to change. The walls were no longer stone, but streaked with what looked like blood. Distorted images flashed on the screen, too quick to process, but I caught glimpses of people, faces twisted in agony, bodies writhing in pain. Suddenly the hallway ended. I found myself in a small, square room with no doors or windows. The droning hum was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. Then a figure appeared. It was humanoid but wrong, its limbs too long, its face a blank void. It stood motionless in the center of the room, and the screen began to glitch violently. Static filled the audio, and a high-pitched whine drilled into my ears. I tried to exit the game, but my computer froze. The figure started moving toward me, its blank face growing larger as it filled the screen. Just as it reached me, the game crashed. I sat there in silence, my heart pounding, staring at my desktop. I thought it was over, but then my speakers emitted a low, guttural sound. It wasn't coming from the game, it was coming from my computer itself. The sound lasted for a few seconds before stopping abruptly. Shaken but curious, I decided to dig deeper into the game's files. Hidden within the folder were images and text documents. The images were horrific, grainy photos of people, some of them children, in what looked like abusive or tortured states. One image showed a person bound to a chair, their face obscured by shadows. Another was of a child crying, their hands clutching a broken toy. The text documents were even worse. They contained random strings of words, but buried within them were phrases like, "They're watching," "There's no escape," and "You chose this." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whispers, the cries, the static. I tried to convince myself it was just a game, some sick piece of art designed to shock and disturb. But the longer I thought about it, the more I doubted that explanation. Who made this game? Why was it hidden on the dark web? And what was the purpose of those images and documents? Over the next few days, strange things started happening. My computer began acting erratically, programs opening and closing on their own, files disappearing, and my webcam light flickering even when I wasn't using it. I received anonymous emails with cryptic messages like, "You shouldn't have played," and "Do you feel safe?" One message contained a link to a dark web forum discussing the game. People claimed it was cursed, that those who played it would start seeing shadows, hearing voices, or worse. I deleted the game and wiped my computer, but the unease never left. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me out of that game. I no longer play horror games or explore the dark web. The whispers from Sad Satan still echo in my mind, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lie hidden in the shadows of the internet. If you ever hear about Sad Satan or games like it, my advice is simple. Don't play. Some things aren't just meant to disturb you, they're meant to haunt you. And once you open the door to that world, you might not be able to close it again. And that concludes the most disturbing dark web horror stories ever told. These real-life accounts remind us that the dark web is more than just a place for hidden information. It's a realm where the darkest parts of humanity thrive. If there's one takeaway from these stories, it's this: curiosity can lead you to places you were never meant to go. Let us know in the comments which story chilled you the most, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unsettling tales. Until next time, stay safe, stay cautious, and keep to the light.